see stop out runs on the dollar in other countries. In other words, there may be a situation where, for instance, in Greece, an order goes out due to political turmoil that all currency exchanges are to stop as of 3 p.m. on this coming Friday, something like that. And what would happen is a run where people would attempt to second guess, if you will, to be prescient and see into the future, and they will attempt to get a spread of currencies that will do them good based on how they feel about their odds in their local situation as Greece goes through yet another presumed military coup, or at least the turmoil that suggests that. So we'll see that kind of thing occur, and that'll be the first sign of the euro's demise, because they won't be seeking the euro. As each of these countries go through their form of internal combustion, the whole of the artificial structure of the euro will collapse, as will the EC, the European Community. The issue here is really, it's magnificent to look at in the sense of the word magnificent as being ultimate, penultimate, acme, the alta of the experience, because here from the United States, we will be able to watch as its own form of empire, 350 million people large, succumbs to the forces. It's actually a battle between two forces. At the time they tried to create the European Community and force it through everybody with first the European trade zones, and then the European Community, and then the European Union, and then the Central Parliament, and then the central currency, and all of this over the past 35 years, they have been, that is to say, the powers that be, have been working against a natural trend that was spreading through the populace of the planet. And that natural trend was towards more home rule, more tribal, more local, more connected, even as the society grew larger. And it is my estimation that the species as a whole has that as an inbuilt part of our collective consciousness to keep us from going absolutely batshit crazy. And that my supposition is that the species as a whole, our collective consciousness, knows that as we expand in numbers, in order to keep us cohesive, we have to shift our focus and eventually become bilocational, so to speak, where we can think at a species level and act that way at our local level with all of our local guys. And we'll focus more in a tribal level. That was clearly the developing trend that came out of the chaos of the late 50s and in through the 60s. Now, then they attempted to impose mega organizations on top of that chaos. And one of these centers of imposition was the European Community. And as I say, it started off first as a trade zone and then starts working its way upward. That concept is now crumbling under the circumstances that we find ourselves living in. And we will see how such a thing splinters. And we'll see it this summer. The reason that that's important that we see that is because we will live through it here in the United States shortly thereafter. Maybe as little as 3 weeks, maybe as long as 3 months, but very shortly thereafter, we'll start feeling those same pressures here. And it may be that, say, some group gets really irritated and says, okay, that's it, like the Alaskans. They get really irritated because, for instance, the radioactivity is piling up in the Gulf of Alaska and no one just gives a damn, so they're going to go off and be their own country. That kind of thing. The forces that will be splintering America will work at that level as well as at the smaller level. ATMs breaking down and all of that kind of thing. I think there will be an interrelated component to the destruction of the system within the European Community. So imagine this, as Greece and Spain and Portugal and Italy and ultimately France and Germany and Holland, etc., go through this, we're going to see a corresponding degradation in the stability that makes up the civilization. That'll be ATMs, that'll be grocery deliveries, that'll be bank openings, that'll be regular paid holidays, health care, train service, all of this kind of thing. just as there's other pressures that on the northern hemisphere that are going to be impacting at the same time many of those same service deliveries. So we may see some rather dramatic failures in those just-in-time systems.
Wow, okay. And then, so the financial collapse, the 3 days around the world forecast is still on?
Oh, yes.
Okay.
The issue for us is the following. When we're looking at the data sometimes, it's as though we've got to press our eyes up against an aquarium and look through a little tiny hole in a sheet of paper. So we only get a pinhole, and we cannot tell how deep the object is. We don't have much in the way of depth perception. So we may get a clear picture of it, but not understand just exactly how big it is. Make sense?
It does make sense.
Okay.
And then I wanted to follow up on silver a little bit. Are you still seeing that reflected in your forecast of the 5 days up and possibly 20 showing up in the linguistics for the summer?
Yes, as it may be coincident with, I have no way of tying it to them by temporal marker, but it may be coincident with the problems that'll come through the European zone this summer. It'll certainly proceed across September and October, and that may be when we actually end up with our $20 days up and the breakthrough. But basically, you have to understand the silver isn't getting more valuable, the dollar is getting more worthless.
Okay, and do you have a temporal marker for the 3 days that we can expect to watch for?
I have a temporal marker, but I don't know the span between them. The temporal marker will be the general who gets on out and spills his guts about something on the media. So when we see that, that I know to be in the chain of events prior to the hitting the knee of the curve, so to speak, for the precious metals and other commodities. This will not be a good time, bear in mind, because this will not be occurring to silver alone. It will be occurring to everything that humans need, especially those things that we eat and burn for fuel.
Okay, Cliff, thank you.
Gemini? I'll ask the question from Green Meadow. Cliff, diaspora has been occurring in a general way all over, but there have been some massive forecasts for diaspora in the US. The 220 million number includes mentions of an upper-level minion divorce as a temporal marker, and crossing great rivers to the north, latitude 50, etc. Ill winds, people dying in the journey, and assistance from tribal peoples. One of the reports suggested this might occur in late 2011. Can you tell us more about this diaspora and anything in your recent report?
The recent report that got ed up had yet to hit the, looks like the crew is here, but I'd yet to hit the Terra entity, so I can't tell how close we are to this. But the description of the event back in the day when the language was forecast was pre-Fukushima. So now we have the following situation, which I touched on in the interview with Mel, but I didn't go into any detail. Back then, we had the 220 million people having to rush north at some peril. They were in a fear mode trying to get north. It appeared to occur in this year, 2011. It appeared to occur in a bad weather situation. It appeared to occur in North America. We didn't have a lot in the way of a cause for the activity that begins the push north, and then we had a lot of detail in some of the descriptors describing the push north without really understanding why. Now, it makes a lot more sense now, this side of the Fukushima event, because as things become nastier and nastier and nastier with Fukushima not being corrected, and the accident or accident by design from BP that shut down the loop current and in turn shut down the Gulf Stream, the radioactivity is becoming concentrated in the northern hemisphere. It may become so concentrated that no amount of spin or mind control drugs or whatever will be able to deny the fact, and at that point we may see that the populace rushes north because there is currently a curious safety zone north of 50 in the northern hemisphere. And I mean, it's looking more and more as though radioactivity will be the driving force, and that the Fukushima event and perhaps pending events will promulgate, and we may have misinterpreted the 9 passages of the ill winds, because it may be that the ill winds should have been just interpreted as existing, and then the number 9, instead of being applied to the number of times around the planet, maybe we should have applied that to like 9 sources to pollute the ill winds or something along those lines in terms of an interpretation. I don't have that data set anymore, so I can't go back and look at it just because they're too large to keep and we have to take a snapshot and get the next report and then throw it away and then go on to the next one. But at this point, what if we're hit by a very large earthquake that affects yet more nuclear plants, most of which are clustered in the northern hemisphere, and we get yet more radiation into the already radioactively polluted system that we're starting to live in? We're going to soon reach a point where there will be a collective consensus to move.
Thank you, Cliff. It's just confusing in the sense that you have data saying diaspora north of latitude 40, 50, but then you have the powers that were migrating to the southern hemisphere. So which do you think is it?
Well, look at it this way. I think it's both. I mean, they're not mutually exclusive. The powers that be knew it was coming in advance, so they went ahead and took their money and bought land in Paraguay and had underground places built and all of this kind of thing. Now, if any of us had had the knowledge that it was happening in advance and had vast quantities of money, when we might have done the same. But for all of the rest of us who are suddenly going to be forced to live with the knowledge that staying put equals some level of risk of death, disfigurement, etc., that it's kind of like a herd mentality. At least that's how I'm assuming it will play out. That the seed thought will somehow be expressed, and it will go through the herd fairly rapidly, and then we'll see something of a panic.
Thanks, Cliff. Alton, you have a question.
Yes. Hi, Cliff.
Hello.
This question is from Uranus Rising. In your Scottish Sovereign interview, you spoke of the underlying assumptions inherent in Christianity as it had been put out into the Western world will be in a huge state of chaos in 2013, and at the center of that chaos will be Great Britain. Any more info, data on the UK religious Reformation, revolution, and questioning of the whole king, queen, divine right to rule?
No, I hadn't gotten to that part because in this past report, so no, I'm sorry, I've got no new data that way. The global pop is one of the larger ones, and it's one of the last ones I do. Sorry, I hadn't hit that. I was so captivated by the market and all the cross-links going back out from the shock. But there's one thing we can say quite clearly, that it is not good for monarchs and rulers of all stripes when instability exists in those who would be ruled. So the level of instability that we see coming globally as a result of the dollar death in all of its forms doesn't bode well for any monarchs anywhere or any government anywhere, because it'll be virtually impossible to control the ripples that are going to go on through. Bear in mind that basically all paper currencies are supporting the monarchies. They exist only to serve the monarchy. They're one of the last vestiges of the divine right to rule, because somehow these people have a divine right to print money and charge us interest in the printing, and thus make us instant slaves, because they loan you $1 and expect $1.05 back without that 5 ever being created. So it's a Ponzi scheme from the beginning, and all of these pyramid schemes collapse when you can't add a greater sized layer at the bottom. And we've reached a planet that is totally polluted with it now, and we can't add any larger layers at the bottom. And we're at this nexus that is actually terrible and going to be huge, and it's going to ripple around the planet many times as we get to watch